Welcome. As you can tell, I am not Tom Vick. Our State Bar President is very ill today and was not able to make it, and I'm going to do my best to welcome you to the State Bar Annual Meeting as I know Tom would. You know, the annual meeting is an appropriate time for lawyers, judges, and law students to come together and celebrate leaders who have made outstanding contributions to the legal profession in their communities. I want to especially show our gratitude for the litigation section in its support of the luncheon today as we honor the bar leaders. We have a fantastic speaker today, and I know you're eager to hear the speaker, but before we get to that, we have a few presentations to make. But most importantly, we have the family of Rayad Ali Muhammad with us today, and I'm going to call Danielle, Ariana, and Serena with their father to come lead us into the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite Santos Vargas, the 2017-2018 chair of the Local Bar Services Committee, to come forward and present our Local Bar Service Awards. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Local Bar Services Committee has the privilege to work closely with local bar associations across the state and also to witness the remarkable work they accomplish. Each year, the committee selects one individual who has shown commitment, dedication, and loyalty to the bar at all levels of service. This award is named after the late Judge Sam Williams, who for many years served as the secretary of the Northeast Texas Bar Association and led that local bar organization to great success. It's his enthusiasm and also his professional pride that we commemorate today. It's my honor to announce the winner of the 2018 Judge Sam Williams Award, Andrew Tolchin, nominated by Sherry Travers of the Texas Lawyers Group. Andrew is intensely dedicated to the profession and makes an extraordinary impact on the legal community. Andrew both founded and administers the Texas Lawyers Group, a digital bar association with approximately 10,000 Texas licensed attorney members. The group enables attorneys to better serve the public, to go about pro bono work and other community service, and to engage students in schools. In other words, the group helps them be better lawyers. During and after Hurricane Harvey, the Texas Lawyers Group provided a vital platform for members to communicate on issues ranging from how to file a hurricane-related claim to verifying court closures. In fact, Andrew's group did so much good work after Harvey and during Harvey that the ABA Journal took note and featured its contributions in an article titled "Social Media Unites Lawyers to Help Those in Need." When a Lone Star legal aid attorney expressed in Texas Lawyers about the need to budget for cell phones for displaced pro bono attorneys, Andrew directed them to the Texas Bar Foundation. He also advised them to fill out a grant application, and he alerted the foundation to expect the application. As a result of Andrew's efforts, Lone Star Legal Aid was granted the funds to meet its pressing needs. Andrew also made history when Texas Lawyers became the first solely digital bar ever listed and hyperlinked from the State Bar of Texas's online bar association directory. Andrew also brought the CLE deeper into the digital age when he attained approval from the State Bar's MCLE department that self-study CLE credits can include a member's review of substantive legal discourse in the Texas Lawyers Facebook page. But that's not all. Andrew manages and/or created a wide array of online legal communities beyond the Texas Lawyers Group, a list that's way too long to list here. Countless attorneys have received paying referrals through groups Andrew both created and maintains. Some attorneys have even found employment via job listing in the groups, and also others have found office space through the community's free listings. All of this translates to better and more efficient service to the public. In addition, and importantly, Andrew actively promotes the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program in the Texas Lawyers Group to ensure that attorneys who are suffering from mental health or substance abuse issues know that confidential help is available to them. All of this doesn't even begin to cover Andrew's substantial contributions as a state bar director and as a volunteer for many other committees and organizations. Andrew embodies what it is to be an outstanding leader who has made an extraordinary impact on the community, resulting collectively in over 1 million interactions between Texas lawyers and the online legal communities he has built. Andrew Tolchin, please stand and be recognized. Where is he? Andrew, you will receive your award and have an opportunity to take a picture with our Executive Director, Mr. Trey Atfel, after the luncheon. The Local Bar Services Committee honors local bar associations with the Award of Merit, recognizing their overall bar year, including community service, member service, publications, and social events. More information on these local bar projects is provided in your program. As I read this year's Award of Merit winners, please stand to be recognized. Following the program, you'll receive your award and have an opportunity to take pictures with Trey Atfel. The 2018 Award of Merit winners are for Division I, Lubbock Area Bar Association. For Division II, Jefferson County Bar Association. For Division III, Austin Bar Association. And for Division IV, the Dallas Bar Association. As you all know, we have many outstanding local bar associations to recognize for their exemplary service to their members, the community, and the justice system. You can read about their award-winning projects in your luncheon program. I would also like to take the opportunity to recognize the remarkable local bar executive directors and their staff members. All volunteers know that your dedication enables Texas lawyers to better serve their communities and provide access to justice. Will representatives of the local bars being honored today please stand as I read your association's name. Following the program, you'll receive your award and have an opportunity to take pictures with our Executive Director, Trey Atfel. Austin Bar Association. Bexar County Women's Bar Association. Dallas Association of Young Lawyers. Dallas Bar Association. Houston Bar Association. Jefferson County Bar Association. Lubbock Area Bar Association. San Antonio Bar Association, and Tarrant County Bar Association. Thank you to all local bar representatives who are present here today. Your commitment to the profession, your community, and our judicial system is truly inspiring. Now I'd like to invite Trey Atfel to the podium to honor the State Bar of Texas Pro Bono and Legal Services Award recipients, the Law-Focused Education Award recipients, and the Presidential Citation recipients. Thank you all.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Bar Leaders Recognition Luncheon. Every year the State Bar of Texas has the opportunity to honor attorneys who selflessly take on pro bono cases in their pursuit to go above and beyond to achieve access to justice for low-income Texans. I'm honored to recognize the dedicated women, men, law firms, and legal service organizations of this year's State Bar of Texas Pro Bono and Legal Services Awards. As I read the winners' names, please note their name so that we can recognize them. Winners will receive their award and take photos after the luncheon. The Frank J. Scurlock Award honors an attorney for outstanding pro bono work. This year the award goes to Ronald Ned Dennis. The J. Chris Doherty Legal Services Award recognizes an outstanding legal services staff attorney. This year's recipient is Amy Maldonado of South Texas College of Law in Houston. The W. Frank Newton Award, named after my old law school professor, recognizes the pro bono efforts of attorney groups whose members have made outstanding contributions toward increasing access to legal services for the poor. This year, the award goes to the San Antonio Young Lawyers Foundation. The Pro Bono Award recognizes a volunteer attorney organization that has made outstanding contributions to guarantee that all Texans have access to the legal system. This year, the award goes to the Houston Volunteer Lawyers. The Pro Bono Coordinator Award honors an individual for exceptional contributions to improve legal services for the poor while serving as the Pro Bono Coordinator for a legal entity. This year's recipient is Carrie Brown of Baker Botts in Houston. The Pro Bono Support Staff Award recognizes the invaluable contributions that non-attorney volunteers provide to our effort. Its purpose is to promote the awareness of pro bono activities that non-attorneys can participate in and to encourage non-attorneys who work in the legal profession to volunteer their time and specialty skills to pro bono projects within their community. This year's recipient is Ann Berkowitz of Winston and Strawn of Houston. The Judge Merrill Hartman Pro Bono Judge Award honors a judge for exemplary pro bono service, including outreach to attorneys to increase the quantity and quality of pro bono representation, modifications to court processes to increase access to justice, advocacy for access to justice, or service as a volunteer judge for pro bono clinics or proceedings. This year's award goes to Judge Eduardo V. Rodriguez. Please take a moment to read about these dedicated leaders in your program. They set an example for what we all can do in our communities, and we're so appreciative of their work. So now on to the Law-Focused Education Awards. One of the best things about being an attorney is the opportunity to help others in a capacity that only those in the legal field are equipped to do. This includes instilling a commitment to liberty, justice, and the rule of law in our elementary, middle, and high school students. Every year, attorneys work to kindle the spirit of justice among our youth through law-related education, and it is an honor today to acknowledge some of the most dedicated among them. After the program, winners will receive their awards and take photos. As I read the Law-Focused Education Award recipients, would they please stand to be recognized? The State Bar of Texas established the Nancy L. Garms Memorial Award in 1995 to honor an attorney or judge who emulates tireless service to the State Bar of Texas law-focused education programs. This year's recipient is Ryan Kellis Turner. The Leon Jaworski Award for Teaching Excellence recognizes those who have made an outstanding contribution to law-focused education and who foster understanding of our legal and judicial systems. This year, the honorary Leon Jaworski Award for Teaching Excellence goes to Mavis Tribal. And finally, on behalf of President Vick, I want to take this opportunity to honor some of the organizations for their extensive work on behalf of victims of Hurricane Harvey. Each of these groups is receiving a presidential citation from President Vick for their dedication to pursuing equal access to justice and their tireless efforts to help survivors of this disaster, including attorneys in the affected areas, get the assistance that they needed to put their lives back together as well. After the program, the recipients will receive their citations and take photos. As I read the citation recipients, please stand to be recognized. The Houston Volunteer Lawyers, the pro bono legal aid arm of the Houston Bar Association. Lone Star Legal Aid. Andrea Stone of the Texas Bar Foundation. The Texas Access to Justice Commission and the State Bar of Texas Legal Access Division. And the Texas Access to Justice Foundation. Congratulations to all of our award recipients. We're grateful for your service to the profession and the people of Texas. I would now like to invite Wendy Berg back to the podium to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon. It again is a pleasure to be here today, now as myself, and it's an honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker today. Joseph Crespino, he told me I can call him Joe, is the Jimmy Carter Professor of American History at Emory University in Georgia. He holds a PhD from Stanford University. Joe is a native of a very tiny town of Macon, Mississippi. He is a respected historian of the 20th century United States, the American South since Reconstruction. He has written 3 books, including In Search of Another Country, Mississippi and the Conservative Counter-Revolution, and Strom Thurmond's America. This most recent book, which I'm very excited about, is called Atticus Finch, The Biography, Harper Lee, Her Father, and the Making of an American Icon. This explores the complicated origin of the hero of the Pulitzer Prize-winning To Kill a Mockingbird, which every lawyer I know has seen at least 10 times and read the book repeatedly. Crispino's book traces the origin of Atticus Finch to the author, Harper Lee's father, A.C. Lee, who was a lawyer and editor of Lee's hometown paper. Please join me in welcoming Professor Joseph Crespino.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for that welcome. I'm delighted to be here. I've never spoken in a room with this many lawyers in it before. It's great fun to be here. It's great fun to be here to talk about Atticus Finch. I'm sure I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure if I did, many of you would raise your hands when I ask you if Atticus Finch was your model or your inspiration for choosing to go into your profession. The truth is, Atticus Finch is America's ideal lawyer. He is the model not only for lawyers, but really he's kind of a civic ideal in the way that he functions in our political culture. I got interested in this topic because of the uniqueness of To Kill a Mockingbird and Atticus Finch in American literature and in American popular culture. Now, it's true, I grew up in a small town called Macon, Mississippi. It sounds a lot like Macomb, Alabama, the fictional town from To Kill a Mockingbird. But it's also true that I'm interested in this as a political historian. Because if you think about, a lot of my work has dealt with the history of the American South and national political history from the 1930s through to the turn of the 21st century. This period when the South is moving from a Jim Crow society into the modern era. And you think about the works, the works of cultural productions that take place during that time. To Kill a Mockingbird really does stand out. It stands out, and the figure of Atticus Finch stands out as a way in which so many Americans come to think about and learn about that part of our history. This book continues to be assigned so often in American classrooms. My daughter's an 8th grader. She read it this year in her 8th grade class. And so many young people are taught that book. And why do we teach that book? We teach that book because we want young people to learn the values of empathy and tolerance. We all live in a multiracial democratic society, and these are essential lessons that children should learn at a young age. And Atticus Finch and To Kill a Mockingbird is so often one of the means in which so many children learn that lesson. So it's an important book, it's an important figure in our society and in our political culture. And another indication of its importance is just the way that it gets evoked by various lawyers and politicians. Think about this speech. 2017, President Barack Obama, the nation's first African-American president, giving his farewell address. And one of the things he's talking about in that address is his sense of disappointment that issues of racial division remain so salient and so vivid in American politics today. And who did he call on as a figure to urge Americans to have a more understanding, empathetic way of thinking, to reach across the color and think about people's experiences from different points of view? He evoked the words of Atticus Finch. He said, each of us needs to try to heed the advice of a great character in American fiction, Atticus Finch. He said this on January 10th, 2017 in his farewell address. And then he quoted Atticus, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." Now, we might have asked President Obama, which Atticus Finch are you talking about? Right? Because there are actually two Atticus Finches now. Some of you may know, in 2015, there is a long-lost novel that was discovered in a security deposit box in a bank in Monroeville, Alabama, by Harper Lee's lawyer. And it was a manuscript that was actually the original novel, the first novel that Harper Lee ever wrote. It's called Go Set a Watchman. Now, I'm sure many more of you have read To Kill a Mockingbird than Go Set a Watchman. So let me tell you a little bit what happens in Go Set a Watchman and why it's important. In Go Set a Watchman, the same characters from To Kill a Mockingbird are in this other novel. It was written first, but the action takes place 2 decades later. It takes place in the 1950s. And young Scout Finch is now the grown-up Jean Louise. She's 26 years old, and she comes back from New York to her hometown of Macomb, and she's visiting her family. And her beloved father, Atticus, a man who is noble and wise and so kind he wouldn't hurt a ground squirrel, is there, and she realizes that he has joined the White Citizens Councils. White Citizens Councils are, of course, actually an actual organization that started in the Deep South in the 1950s in protest of the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. Atticus has fallen in with the small-minded racist reactionaries, and Jean Louise doesn't understand why. And over the course of the novel, there's a series of kind of staged conversations that she has with various men in her life, her suitor, Henry Clinton, her uncle, Jack, and then with Atticus himself. in which she is irate, she's disappointed, she's disenchanted, and they're trying to explain to her this kind of principled, conservative, segregationist position in Southern political life. Now, what was so disappointing to so many people who had named their children Atticus or who had named their pets Atticus was that the Atticus of Go Set a Watchman is kind of exactly what you would think a white male Southerner who's 70 years old and arthritic would be like in South Alabama in the 1950s, right? He doesn't like this. He doesn't like the changes that are coming to the region. He has very racially paternalistic views, right? And so we have these two different Atticuses. We have the noble, wise Atticus, the great defender of the downtrodden, the man who represented Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird, the wrongfully accused African-American man, wrongfully accused of raping a white woman. And he does it. Why does Atticus do that in To Kill a Mockingbird? Because he does it for his kids. Because he's a good father. He knows he can't hold his head up around town if he didn't take that case. And then we have this other Atticus, the Atticus of Go Set a Watchman. The Atticus that's a racist, reactionary figure. So how do we make sense of those? How do we make sense of these two different versions of Atticus that Harper Lee gave us? Well, that's what I try to do in this book that I've just written, Atticus Finch, the biography. Of course, you can't really write a biography of a fictional character. There's no such thing. But what I try to do in this book is figure out what was going on for Harper Lee and how to make sense of how these characters could seemingly diverge so fundamentally. And one of the first places that I went to look was with Harper Lee's father himself, Amasa Coleman Lee. Harper Lee, when she spoke in the early 1960s about the book, and she spoke to reporters in promotions for the movie To Kill a Mockingbird that came out in late December 1962, people asked her where she got the character, and she would often say that her father wasn't exactly Atticus Finch, but was the inspiration for the character, that they shared the same sort of disposition. So I wanted to learn more about A.C. Lee. Well, what did we know about A.C. Lee? We knew that, like Atticus Finch, A.C. Lee was a small-town lawyer, and he was a member of the Alabama State Legislature for about a decade, from the mid-1920s through the late 1930s. But unlike Atticus Finch, A.C. Lee was also the owner and the editor of the newspaper in Monroeville, Alabama, the Monroe Journal. He owned that newspaper from 1929 to 1947. So being a historian, I went back and looked at those old newspapers. Now, there's no guarantee that a small-town newspaper in Alabama in the 1930s would have a kind of editorial page where you could get some insight into the editor's thinking. I grew up in the 1980s in a town in Mississippi where in our local paper, they ran the obituaries on the front page. That was the kind of news. That was the only really news that mattered to folks, who died. But the Monroe Journal in the 1930s was not like that. Not only did A.C. Lee have an editorial page, he had an active and ambitious editorial page. He was writing 2, 3, 4 editorials each week. And it wasn't just about local matters. It was about local politics, but also state politics. It was about the evolution of the New Deal over the course of the 1930s. By the late 1930s, he's writing about the rise of fascism in Europe and calling for Americans to get involved in the war early, before the war would come to their own shores, to combat the religious persecution that's taking place. He writes about Kristallnacht in 1938. What's remarkable about that is this is a small-town newspaper editor in a rural area of Alabama. A.C. Lee had no more than an 8th grade education. I learned that too in my research for this book. That was the highest great. He wasn't like all of you when he became a lawyer, right? He didn't go to a law school and get his degree there. He got a law degree the way you get a law degree in the rural South in the early 20th century. You read for the bar. You work for somebody in their law office, you read for the bar, and you join the bar that way. That's how A.C. Lee joined the bar in Alabama in the early 20th century. And what I discovered in reading those editorials, I read all 18 years worth of them, is that A.C. Lee was the inspiration for both the ideal version of Atticus that we see in To Kill a Mockingbird, but also the reactionary, more repugnant figure that we see in Go Set a Watchman. Let me just give you some brief examples of both. In terms of his idealism, A.C. loved to write these kinds of civic sermons, and he would talk about the importance the jury system plays in democratic society. One of the things he talked about a lot, too, in the 1930s, the 1930s was an era of political demagoguery in the American South. So you'd have the rise of these figures like Huey Long and Herman Talmadge. A.C. Lee couldn't stand Huey Long. Huey Long was 2 states over, and yet he was writing about Huey Long in fact, at one time there was a series of about 8 weeks where he was writing, every week he would write an editorial about Huey Long. And the last one he says, "I'm sure that my readers are getting tired of hearing so much about Huey Long." But then he just went on anyway, right? He just went on and just wrote about Huey Long because he really thought Huey Long was a baleful influence in American political life, amassing all this power, destroying his enemies, demagoguing on economic issues, and winning the loyalties of uneducated folks. Couldn't stand Herman Talmadge in my state of Georgia either, and particularly because of the way that Talmadge was opposing FDR and what FDR was trying to do in the New Deal. He also wrote editorials against lynchings that took place in the South in the 1930s. He did this from a very conservative position, right? He did this from a defense of law and order and opposition to mob rule. So you can see how these kinds of writings would inspire Harper Lee to create the figure of Atticus Finch. But he's also changing. He's also, responding to the important events in Southern political life in the 1940s. And particularly by the late 1930s, he starts to oppose the New Deal. He never abandons Franklin Roosevelt. He votes for Franklin Roosevelt all 4 times Roosevelt runs. And that's because he, even though he's getting very upset with the changes and the liberalism that he sees in the New Deal, he's very opposed to labor unions. There had been a factory that came down from Pennsylvania to Monroeville in 1937. He's the lawyer for the local industry there. They manufacture women's pantyhose is what they do. And they had come, and why did they come to Alabama? Because there's no unions in Alabama, right? So he can't stand labor unions. He can't stand the role that labor unions, the influence they're having over National Democratic Party politics by the late 1930s. But he's also breaking with the New Deal, particularly during the war years. And why? Because it was during the war years, it was World War II that set loose all kinds of forces in Southern social and political life. This is the beginning of the modern civil rights movement, is the World War II years. Franklin Roosevelt signs Executive Order 8802 in 1941, creating the Fair Employment Practices Committee. And that was a loathsome thing to white Southern segregationists like A.C. Lee. And you begin to see a kind of a budding civil rights movement, and you begin to see national civil rights organizations that are playing more and more a role in National Democratic Party politics. And A.C. Lee didn't like it one bit. And all of those reactionary defenses of states' rights that we read in Go Set a Watchman in the voice of Atticus Finch, some of them could be taken straight from the editorial page of her father, of Harper Lee's father. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how he's the inspiration for both of these figures, for both the good Atticus, and the more repugnant Atticus. Okay, so A.C. Lee inspired both. But why did Harper Lee change the character so dramatically? Right? Why is it, there's what's happening in real life, but that doesn't necessarily have to correlate with what's going on in a fiction. Well, one answer to this question of why the Atticus of Mockingbird is so different from the Atticus of Go Set a Watchman is that it's a technical issue in terms of the writing. In To Kill a Mockingbird, we see Atticus Finch through the eyes of Scout and Jim. We have the adolescent narrator of Scout. And so all of us, when we're 9 years old, tend to think our parents are pretty great and pretty heroic. And then we grow up and we realize it's all very different, right? And that's what Jean Louise realizes. Part of what the drama of Go Set a Watchman is Jean Louise being 26 years old and realizing that Atticus Finch is not the man she thought he was, right? And so that's a big reason why the characters are so different. But one of the things I do in this book is I also try to read the changes in the character of Atticus between the two novels in light of what's going on in the American South at that time. Right? The argument in Go Set a Watchman, this is something we don't necessarily understand. When Go Set a Watchman came out in 2015, all the commentary was just about, hey, Atticus Finch is a racist. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. But in that kind of commentary, we've missed something very important about Go Set a Watchman as a novel. That actually, the political argument of the novel is one in which Harper Lee is trying to show Atticus as a kind of principled segregationist, a principled Southern conservative segregationist, that there are actually some decent folks in the citizens' councils. In that sense, Harper Lee would have been very inspired by, likely, and reading politics at the time, very much like someone like William Faulkner. William Faulkner, the Nobel Prize-winning writer from Mississippi. He had won his Nobel in 1948. In 1956, he publishes a much-discussed article in Life magazine called The Letter to the North. And what does Faulkner talk about in The Letter to the North? This was very soon after the controversy around Autherine Lucy, the first African-American woman to enroll at the University of Alabama in the spring of 1956. And Faulkner is writing this letter to the North, and he's telling the North to go slow. Don't force change on the South. If you try to force change on the South in the 1950s, you're going to get exactly what you had in the 1870s, right? This idea that Reconstruction had been this colossal blunder. Of course, that's a history that we totally reject now as being history written by the losers. It's this kind of Southern nationalist understanding of Reconstruction. But it was one that many people, not just Faulkner, but most Americans still subscribed to in the 1950s. And Faulkner is telling the North to go slow. And the idea of Go Set a Watchman is a kind of defense of the principled Southern conservative members of the citizens' councils who were going to keep down the hotheads, who are going to not let the Klan get out of control too much, and who are going to be the responsible leaders during this time of great political unrest. That's the way the citizens' councils talked about themselves. I'm not saying that's how they were. Let me be careful here. I'm not saying that's what they were. That's the way they thought of themselves. And that's the way that Harper Lee thought of them in this book, Go Set a Watchman, that she writes in the first couple of months of 1957. But Southern politics are changing dramatically in the late 1950s, in 1957 and 58 and 59. And what you see in the South during this time is a rise of a militant segregationist movement. You see in the American South, it's remarkable. There are figures who were elected in the late 1950s all across the Deep South who would have been considered jokes or political nobodies just a few years earlier, but they're winning political office by the late 1950s. Now, the Citizens Councils was supposed to keep those folks in check. It was supposed to hold on to segregation in this legal, reasonable, peaceful way. But what was happening in the Deep South, at this very time that Harper Lee is writing these two novels, what was happening in the Deep South was that it wasn't the Citizens Councils that were moderating the Klan, but rather it was the Klan that was radicalizing the Citizens Councils. You see this starkly in Alabama in 1958, a bellwether election in the gubernatorial election that year. This man, George Wallace, loses that race. We forget that George Wallace, before he became kind of the symbol of kind of demagogic politics in American life in the 1960s and 1970s, he was the racially moderate candidate for governor in Alabama in 1958. And he loses to a man named John Patterson. And John Patterson had been a nobody in Alabama. Now, his daddy had been somebody. His daddy had been a local prosecuting attorney who had cracked down on organized mob in Phoenix City, Alabama, and had gotten assassinated because of it. And young John runs in his place and becomes attorney general, and then translate that into a run for the governorship in 1958. And John Patterson runs with the explicit backing of the Citizens Councils and of the Ku Klux Klan. In fact, it's remarkable. George Wallace actually tries to use this against John Patterson. He publicly says, do you realize, he says this to Alabama voters, do you realize that John Patterson will not renounce the endorsement of the Ku Klux Klan? Are you going to vote for this kind of candidate? He asked Alabama voters, and Alabama voters said, yeah, we are. That's what they did in 1958. They elected John Patterson. And it was after that election that George Wallace makes his famous Faustian bargain. But he vows that he would never be out-segregated again. He'd never let any candidate get to the right of him on the race issue. And he wouldn't. And he would win election in 1962 and give that famous inaugural speech where he pledged segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. So it was in this context that Harper Lee rewrote the character of Atticus. It was in the context of this militant segregationist movement that she crafted the ideal version of Atticus. It was, in a sense, I would argue, her kind of, not a letter to the North, which she might have been writing in Go Set a Watchman, but it was a kind of letter to the South. It was reminding her fellow white Southerners of their best traditions and their noblest impulses. She reminding them that they had it within them and within their traditions to make the necessary changes if they only lived up to their best impulses. Now, I'll admit, I've got some problems with Atticus Finch. You know, the common critique of To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's a good critique, it's the right critique, is that it's a kind of what the literary critics would call a white savior narrative. You know, the white guy is the hero in the end. The African American characters, they're just these kind of types. You know, Tom Robinson is just this figure of empathy. You know, Calpurnia is not fleshed out either. You know, it's where, you know, the white lawyer gets to play the hero in To Kill a Mockingbird. In many ways, Atticus Finch is like the white moderates that Martin Luther King called out in his famous letter from Birmingham jail. There's a delicious, wonderful irony of history. The same month, April 1963, that Gregory Peck wins the Oscar. He finally wins the Oscar. He'd been nominated 4 times before, and he wins it on his 5th try when he portrays Atticus Finch in the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. He wins the Oscar in that same month in Birmingham, Alabama. Martin Luther King is arrested and sent to the Birmingham jail. And it's from there that he writes Letter from Birmingham Jail. It wouldn't be published until later in the summer, but but he wrote it there in April 1963. There's a very famous passage from Letter from Birmingham Jail. I want to read it to you because it's a passage about white moderates. And Atticus Finch in many ways is the quintessential white moderate. King said this, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm, think of that, remember that word, lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." Now here, in talking about the lukewarm support of white moderates, King was invoking a prophetic idiom that would have been familiar to the white ministers to whom he wrote. And it's important to remember that in Letter from Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King, this is a letter that's composed to 8 other white ministers in Birmingham who have published a public letter saying that it wasn't good that Martin Luther King was in town. It wasn't the right time. Birmingham was changing. He was just stirring up trouble. He shouldn't be there. And they write that to him as fellow men of the cloth, right? And this is who he's writing this letter to. But when he writes those ministers, in using this term lukewarm, they would have recognized this idiom. They would have recognized it as part of the warning to the church in Laodicea, received as part of the revelation to John of Patmos. "I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth." That's from Revelations. That was King's message to those white ministers. Get off the fence. Take a side. Put some skin in the game. It's too easy to sit on the sidelines and nitpick about methods and tactics when people are dying and when the stakes are so high. But that wasn't King's only message to those white ministers, nor his only message to white moderates. One of King's favorite verses, one that he shared often with his subordinates and fellow ministers as he sent them out to carry out their campaigns of nonviolent civil disobedience, was the message of Jesus to his disciples in the Gospel of Matthew. "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves." Throughout his career, King was both shrewd and innocent. He was shrewd when he revised his letter from Birmingham Jail to include it in his book, Why We Can't Wait, that was published in the summer of 1964. In Why We Can't Wait, Martin Luther King was making an argument about the relevance and power of nonviolence. And he was making it at a time when a vanguard in the black community had emerged to question this approach. King wrote about his belief that there was, quote, "something in the American ethos that responds to the strength of moral force." Something in the American ethos that responds to the strength of moral force. And who for King was an example of an American responding to moral force? It was none other than Atticus Finch. He wrote in Why We Can't Wait, 1964, "I am reminded of the popular and widely respected novel and film To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch, a white Southern lawyer, confronts a group of his neighbors who have become a lynch-crazed mob, seeking the life of his Negro client. Finch, armed with nothing more lethal than a law book, disperses the mob with the force of his moral courage, aided by his small daughter, who innocently, calling the would-be lynchers by name, reminds them that they are individual men, not a pack of beasts." Now, whether in the novel and the film it was actually Scout helping Atticus or the other way around, that's not important. What's important was King's enduring faith in the strength of moral force. This, it must be remembered, was always the counterbalance to his cynicism about white moderates. In his nod to Atticus Finch, King signaled his belief that within the oppressor race were people with the modicum of decency and empathy without which nonviolent democratic change is impossible. King did not know in early 1964, when he wrote his book, this was before civil rights forces in Congress broke a Southern filibuster for the first time in American history. It was before Lyndon Johnson, that great Texan, signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He did not know whether there were enough moral, decent white people in America to join with Americans of other races to defeat the legalized subjugation of black Southerners through peaceful, nonviolent legislative means. But he believed that there were. He believed that hearts could be changed and minds could be convinced. And through his belief, and the belief of millions of others inspired by him, it became true. Now, we would do well today to remember Martin Luther King's faith in the power of moral example and the essential role that it plays in democratic society. And we should remember, too, the strange way that Harper Lee's novel and the character that she created, Atticus Finch, emerged as a token of that faith. You know, all the dispiriting things that we face today in our politics, the racial divisions, the impulses that seek to drive people back into narrow, tribal identities, extreme partisanship that turns political opponents into mortal enemies, all of these things are things that Martin Luther King and Harper Lee faced in their own day. Yet they did not give up their faith in the power of moral witness. I hope we don't give up on ours today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for those very thoughtful and I think very understated remarks today that we needed to hear. By the way, Joseph has been kind enough to stay. He'll be here outside the door signing books after the luncheon right outside the ballroom. And I encourage you to go by and get a copy. He'll sign it for you and you can visit with them. You know, throughout today's program, we have honored leaders, our own leaders, who felt compelled to make a difference in our legal profession and their communities. As we do close, a reminder to all our award winners, please come up front to the room, claim your beautiful prize, receive your award, and have your picture taken with Trey Apfel, who's stepping in for President Vic today. I want to thank all of y'all for coming and joining as we celebrate so many accomplishments of our local bar associations and attorneys, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.